This one was from GDC 2013, and it is titled How Much Is Enough for Beauty? And what it really is an attempt to make an analysis of visuals and beauty in video games and kind of break it down and figure out what do we really want to concentrate on as artists and as an industry going forward, which I think is kind of important. And so basically it starts at photorealism, right? It has been the holy grail of the video games industry since its inception, because if you think about it, video games are just sort of a childhood dream of having interactive movies at the end of the day. And movies are photorealistic, so that's why we're trying to make games photorealistic. But being a professional artist and doing art for many years, the more I kept doing it, the more I became disenchanted with that idea. And I'm going to try and explain to you guys why. So when you study reality, right, the first thing I do when I study anything is go to the dictionary. This, I think, is Merriam-Webster, and just look up the definition. And reality is a state of things as they actually exist, rather as they may appear or might be imagined. Which is kind of concerning if you think about it, because video games, probably 90% of things you see in video games are kind of imagined, kind of not really existing in the real world. And if you take it a step further, right, and you just take these two images, and this is from a tech demo by Square Enix when they were just working on the current gen tech. It's a render from their engine and a photo of a parking garage. And when you look at them, both look fairly realistic, especially considering the one of them in the photo. But do they look artistically exciting? Are they enticing? Would you buy a game that had that image in the back of the box? These are all very valid questions to ask yourself. And I mean, if we kind of analyze that a bit further, you realize, and I mean, just the biggest takeaway from here is that something being purely realistic apparently has nothing to do with being A, beautiful, B, kind of enticing and alluring and just, grabbing your interest at the end of the day. But if it's not realism, then what is it that actually, grabs your attention and fascinates you and inspires you at the end of the day? And there's this saying that I really like that goes like this. Like a very good professional will always hit the target that everyone's trying to hit, but an exceptional professional will hit a target nobody even sees. And when we're talking about realism, it's not a question of whether we're going to have it. We're definitely going to have it. The only question is when. It's not really a problem, it's just a process. And we're slowly and gradually making our way to it, but we're going to get there. There is no doubt about it. But here's the bigger question. So say you can do anything. What are you going to do then to actually make sure that it's going to be pretty? And so this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about beauty. And, okay. So this is the image that I use every single time I try to break down that concept of beauty in a way, and I really love it. This is Market Street in San Francisco, painted by a Chinese artist named Zhu Haibo. And the one thing I love about it is that it is extremely loose, extremely fast drawn, extremely sketchy, but it exceptionally well communicates what is so beautiful about this image. And it also raises a lot of questions, like say, imagine if this was fully realistically rendered, would that make that image better? I think it's a very tough question to ask, and there's definitely not a definitive answer. You cannot be sure that instead of, the artistic brushstrokes, we would have had just 100% photorealistic windows, or like instead of silhouettes that he has here for lampposts, if we actually had, full 3D lit stuff, would that communicate to us something about beauty that isn't here in the first place? I think what this proves to show, if we just break it down to the bare bones of it, is that beauty is not necessarily in the rendering, that there are other things at play here. And whenever you try to analyze it, you usually arrive at this list of usual suspects, basically. Any kind of representative image that you're going to have always has these. And by these, I mean subject, lighting, color, composition, scale, or detail, and a particular quality of execution to it. And the thing that you see at the bottom is just a very loose concept to explain the idea that since every image does have those, apart from black and white not having color, is the fact that all of them contribute to your art piece that you're making. And say, if you have a fixed composition and you can't change it, or a fixed object, but you need to make a more beautiful image, you can probably work on your lighting. because that makes sense, because you can compensate with lighting, which you can't do with other things. And when they all combine, they eventually trash some kind of comprehensible threshold that makes the image appear beautiful. And when you grasp that concept, you realize that there's certain modularity to it, that you can work with those bits individually. And this is sort of what we're going to try and do right now. We're going to look at a bunch of games, and we're going to try and analyze what each of those elements does and how they work together to help you get a better idea of how to be more analytical about your art. And so the number one thing is the subject of your image. And this is the widest, the absolutely widest part of it that you can't really just directly put your finger on. But sometimes something that's happening in an image is more captivating than sort of the artistic qualities of it. And another great example would be characters, right? Because character artists live and die by their characters being beautiful in a frame. That at the end of the day makes the entire frame beautiful. And so whether it's action, whether it's objects or characters, people, creatures, or whatever, if they are beautiful at the end of the day, if you choose to portray something that is more interesting than a rock, then you're probably contributing to how much the subject of your image makes it more wow-inducing and more appealing. And if we move on to something a lot more artistic and I think a lot more interesting, we're going to give this screenshot from the latest Devil May Cry game by Ninja Theory, and these guys are amazing with their use of color. And I'm sorry it's a bit washed out on the projector here, but it's really juicy on this monitor, which you totally can't see, so I'm sorry for teasing. But basically what happens here is the color composition kind of grabs your attention. It creates these contrasts that make this image special. And it's a great choice for a game because technically every single game or every single piece of art that you're ever going to make is going to have colors. And it's totally up to you to make that choice. And you can just make them fully realistic or kind of go traditional and make them somewhat even boring in a way. Or you can choose to make it your competitive advantage. You can choose to make them that edge, make sure that you stand out because you have vibrant colors or a different color palette. Or, just make sure that the color itself is an element that people actually pay attention to. And Ninja Theory actually went as far as having screen space gradient overlays as a post-process in their game with just two complementary colors of like red and blue or something to ensure that you always have a consistent color composition no matter the camera angle. And this is an extremely simple but brilliant way to ensure that the color scripting, kind of the color theory, the color idea behind the project always gets communicated. And I find it to be very awesome, and I strongly advise you guys to experiment with colors and not be afraid. Because especially for aspiring artists' portfolio and work that I tend to see, a lot of people are very reserved in their use of color. The colors are muted. And what that tells to me is just that you're probably not completely confident in your ability to use colors. And it's not like everything has to be super screamy and like clown barfy, but it's nice and refreshing to see a portfolio of a president that actually can communicate that he has a grip on color composition, that he cares about colors. So if you're thinking about a way to stand out, that could be super handy. But the next point that we have here is lighting, which is also kind of important. And it is important because every single image or every single thing that you ever see in life is just light bouncing into your eye and landing on your retina, basically. And it's interesting because you don't realize that making video game art is sort of a package deal. When you just start making environment art, you think, oh, I just want a model and texture, right? That's all I care about. Maybe I don't even want texture, I just want a model. But then you realize that your renders look like crap because you don't have any good lighting. Well, guess what? No image exists without lighting. And unless you're going to make sure that you work hard on it and make it your ally, it's going to be your enemy. And it's going to drag your image down because you're not working on it. And when you do realize that, there are a lot of great things that you can do with just good lighting to hide the modeling or the texturing that you didn't really have the time to pull off really well. And this is just an extremely neat trick. Like if you look at this alley, right, that is a fairly generic alley if you think about it. But all the lighting effects make it really interesting and, worthy of looking at. And this is actually from Battlefield 3. And I think when they first announced it, I think it was, 4 years at this point, their first trailer was something that truly felt next-gen at that time, even though next-gen wasn't even there, because they really stepped up their lighting. And this is really important, and once again, you're always going to have lighting. So make that choice and make that kind of artistic commitment to make it work for you, or even make it your, super distinguishable style, and make an incredibly iconic game that everybody's going to remember, even though the environments themselves are fairly frugal, if you think about it, right? There isn't too many things going on in the environment. You just have a bunch of pipes and vents and stairs and whatnot. Like, it's not Notre Dame de Paris or something, right? It's fairly straightforward, but the intensity of the lighting, the blooming effects, and the bouncing of the color makes it a very distinguishable visual language that everybody can understand, and apparently a lot of people can get behind, because Mirror's Edge became like a cult classic. And yeah, once again, especially if you don't have too much time, too much manpower, and you want to make something that is going to attract attention, it's right there for you. You can always find a way to make it work. The next one is also very interesting because it's very hard to pull off in games. Every image has composition. It's how you choose to portray whatever you have in your fictional world. And because we have to sacrifice the camera controls usually in order to have better gameplay experience, we're very limited in ways of creating composition. And good composition has a lot to do with having a proper foreground, midground, and background. And this is a screenshot from a game called Deadlight by Tequila Works in Spain. And it's a side-scrolling game made in Unreal 3. And they did a fantastic thing where they turned their limitation, their side-scrolling camera, into one of their strongest assets, because it allowed them to control their camera angles. It allowed them to create proper foregrounds and, very interesting and cinematic compositions that a lot of games just can't afford to do. And so, if you're working on a game where you're severely limited with your camera movement, try to use that as your advantage, because now you can actually build interesting compositions. Or if you're working on your portfolio, you can always choose to portray something like, very plain and simple, just dead on, point your camera and render, or you can be creative with that. You can find ways to add depth to that frame, to make sure that it's really three-dimensional. You can read how it goes into the depth of that fictional world that you're trying to communicate. And this is really interesting because good composition is hardly solved in video games just because of how hard it is to control, but a lot of people are still making an effort. And for example, if you notice, a lot of games tend to have like a giant object in the back that is like sort of a landmark that you're going to. And this is A, very good for gameplay, B, that actually allows you to have consistent composition with a proper background. For example, we at Naughty Dog spend a lot of time trying to guess the places where the player is definitely going to pass through in order to try to frame that, object in the background and try to make sure that you get a really nice looking composition that was specifically tailored and art directed for that particular spot. And you can do that for your personal projects once again, and that definitely creates a very coherent and artistic effect. But now we got to our last point being scale and detail. And what's interesting, just something to explain here, is the reason scale and detail are kind of one in here is because as far as the image is concerned, as far as the frame is concerned, it's just a definition of a certain amount of noise and contrast that you're going to have in your image. Whether it's something really huge that you're showing or something really tiny. At the end of the day, it's just how loaded with detail your image is. And the one thing that's important about detail is A, everybody, especially everybody that's starting out, thinks that it's really cool. And B is that it's extremely time consuming and it's extremely expensive when you're actually making a game. And so, this is a screenshot from Gears of War, right? And Epic is famous for doing an amazing job of pouring tons of blood, sweat, and tears into every square inch of their world that is just beautifully art directed and designed. But at the end of the day, if you're a production studio, that is really expensive. That really takes a lot of time and a lot of forethought. But most importantly here, especially for you guys or being students, or at least some of you, don't get too preoccupied with details, because you're going to spend a lot of time working on them just to realize that you have no idea how to light it properly or what a good color composition looks like. And that is, I started out as a modeler, and that was what I was doing. I would spend weeks uber detailing some bit just with modeling. And then it still looked boring just because I poured everything I knew or all the time I had into that little section of scale and detail, and everything else just sucked. And if you value your time, and if you want to be a diverse and capable artist, look into other disciplines and look into ways to make it work. And I mean, you're all the better for it, right? Because you're going to save time and you're going to be better at the end of the day. Now, a very important point here is that if you remember when we did that little breakdown, one of the things that we talked about was quality of execution that we didn't mention here. And the reason for that being, the quality of execution is tricky because imagine that you take out lighting, color, composition, scale, and detail and subject from your. What's left is quality of execution, but what is really left when you take all these things out? And the question here is actually, you can find it in psychology or medicine because they have an amazing term called hygienic factor, which basically means that when your hygiene is at a level and you wash, which is good, it's not making your health better. It's just making your health stay at the level that it should be. But the moment you stop practicing proper hygiene, the health starts deteriorating. And so when it comes to quality of execution being a hygienic factor, what it means is it doesn't add to your lighting, color, composition, scale and detail, or the choice of your object that you made. It just makes it look bad when it's not present. And what is extremely important to realize here, because a lot of people tend to think that they just want to make high quality art. Quality alone is meaningless. When you're a boss or someone up to you and say, I want to make it look awesome or high quality, they do not necessarily mean just that. They just don't have the proper language to express that the image is lacking artistically. But you should never just think that, oh, if you would put a little bit more polish into it, it would just be a masterpiece. Usually it doesn't work like that. You have to take into consideration every single element of, beauty at your disposal so you can actually concentrate on the bigger picture, on your lighting, on your color. And then just make sure that the quality of execution that you bring to the table is not dragging down at the end of the day. So don't get over fixated on that. Look at the bigger picture. Now here's also an interesting question. So if it's really all about fidelity, then how could we have perceived video games as beautiful years back, right? Like when I go and play an old game that came out like 5 years ago, I'm amazed at how crude it looks because in my mind it looks totally better, basically. And like if you look at Final Fantasy VIII, like despite it looking like this, you probably remember it looking somewhat like this. And there's a great explanation for that.
First, a little visual warm-up. I'll hold up a card, you name the suit. I'm going to go faster and faster, so see if you can keep up.
Okay. Diamond. Club. Spade. Heart. Diamond. Spade. Diamond. Heart. Club. Spade. Heart. Diamond. Club. Heart. Spade. Diamond. Club. Spade. Heart. Club, spade, heart. Did I pass?
No. But few people do.
Black hearts, red spades? Come on, that's like cheating.
Experience has conditioned you into thinking that all hearts are red and all spades are black. Because their shapes are similar, it's easier for your mind to interpret them based on that past experience than to be open to the idea they could be different. We see what we expect to see, not necessarily what's really there. Children who have never played cards always pass this test. Makes you wonder how many other things are right in front of you, sights, sounds, smells that you can't experience because you've been conditioned not to.
Ooh, scary. But in all seriousness, though, that brings us to a very important point about art. And that is, it's funny, we're all game developers here potentially, or already. And where you hear the term, target platform thrown around a lot. Like what target platform you're developing for, you have a PS4 or a PC or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, the one target platform that every one of us should be targeted is human brain. Because it has a lot of specifics as to how it perceives information. As you have just seen, it doesn't really operate on that level where it just grabs all of the information out of the visual world around you. What it does, it's analyzing and it's looking for the standouts that allow it to paint a bigger picture, and then it just fills in the details. So even your brain is not pretended to be able to comprehend the world in its infinite amount of detail, but rather break it down and simplify. And what it means for you as an artist is that you can take advantage of that, and that instead of filling your world with detail, you can apply detail. Because all you're really trying to do at the end of the day is not recreate the real world, because it's pretty arrogant and time-consuming, but suspend the disbelief of your player so they can enjoy the experience that you put forward. And here's a great example. This is an image that was painted actually by our art director, Rob Ruppel. And if you look at it, it looks awesome. It looks almost photorealistic in some places, but at closer inspection, there isn't a single element in that image that is actually properly rendered. It's all cutouts, just flat colors filling a shape and gradients, and a bit more detail for the reflection. But the way it works is, at the end of the day, all of it comes together to create an image that is more than the sum of its parts. And this is what good art can be and should be for you if you're looking to be efficient in what you do. Because if you're making a game and you can do just enough to convince people that it's photorealistic without going over the top with the detail that you're putting into that, you're spending way less time, and you're definitely communicating with your audience, kind of pushing all the right buttons instead of just spraying detail everywhere and hoping that some of it will stick. And so when you're doing art, don't just look for making everything detailed. Try to imply detail. Just as an example, just as an interesting exercise, I tried to go back and take all these elements of beauty that we talked about and try to pair them with the tools, technical tools that we have at our disposal as artists, just to see if there is anything missing right now, something that's preventing us from making gorgeous masterpieces. And if you look at that, especially when it comes to static frames, we have everything we need to make pretty much anything we can dream of. For all of our objects, right? You can just do everything. That's easy, right? We're not really that constrained by polycounts anymore, where we just couldn't model a human face, though it had to be a box. We have enough in order to be able to do that. When it comes to lighting, right? We calculate global illumination, not at runtime, or even at runtime in some engines. And we have all the proper tone mapping and HDRI imagery in order to get that cinematic feel. So you can control your lighting almost like you would for an offline renderer, especially if you are pre-rendering your lighting. Colors, right? You can just choose whatever your color texture is going to be, and that's it. But then you also have a sophisticated post-processing chain that you can implement just like movies do to get the signature color look, color signature to your project. As far as composition, right? Yes, we're limited with our camera control, but we still can utilize our environment. We can still utilize particular camera modes, or taking over control in some places to frame the particular things that we want the player to see. And we have all the classic camera controls that you would find in a regular 3D camera in an offline renderer. Okay, we can control the depth of field and the angle of view and all that. And the last one being scale and detail, and this was the big one for the industry for a long time, right? But after we actually saw the introduction of normal mapping, we can have as much detail as we technically want, or to be more precise, we can have as much detail as we have pixels on screen, which is technically as much as you would want at the end of the day, because you can't effectively communicate more unless you get more resolution. And same thing goes for scale, right? You can just have fog, you can have fancy pants simulated atmospheric fog. It looks really awesome, and that sells your scale, and everything else is just up to you, right? Make big things that are impressive and inspiring. Here's another example. These are two games on PC that were released 4 years apart, and if you ask which one of them, at least from these screenshots, right, which one looks more appealing, it's obviously a trick question, and you realize that the one that's probably older is looking a bit more interesting, and that would be the one on the right. Like that is the answer that I usually get. And the reason? Oh, shit, I should have had all the years. Okay. But yeah, basically, as you can see, the older game can arguably be considered a bit more artistic because they had good color choices. They had some proper fog, some proper aerial perspective to sell the depth of that frame. And 4 years is actually a lot of time for PC game development. But the image on the left, on the right, yeah, it's on the right for you too. Good. Okay, the image on the right definitely holds up, which is kind of important to realize that, yes, you can be pouring everything we have into the latest, gimmicky, cutting-edge tessellation thingy for your engine, or you can try and concentrate on the bigger picture, and that gives you a higher chance of longevity for your game and sort of aging a lot more gracefully. And if there is a takeaway from all of that, is that there are certain things that you can do in order to maximize the effect that your art is going to have on your audience. And in order to be able to do that, you also have to learn how to be efficient and how to save yourself time. And the number one thing when it comes to being efficient is making sure that you can concentrate on the bigger picture. Because yes, any artist that you hire will probably know how to model a crate or an exploding barrel. But if every artist that you hire can actually build good composition and good color composition, and knows about good lighting and how to sell the environment that they produce, and at the end of the day, this is a lot more beneficial for the studio and for you to have the skill at the end of the day, because you are making a bigger influence on the final image at the end of the day. And if you have a studio that can just do that, and every single artist is contributing to the bigger picture, then you can make sure that you can have something exceptional, because these guys will be able to maintain a solid artistic style and vision and improve upon it to make basically a more artistically interesting game. And so what's important here is realizing that making it pretty never comes as an afterthought. For example, like all our Uncharted games or actually not all, starting from 2, had a color script, which is basically a script of colors for every single level in the game consecutively, because we want to be able to kind of pull back and see the progression of our colors in the scope of the entire project, and how they enhance the mood, and how they work with you to make sure that you feel the change of scenery, because there's also a change in color tone, because they influence you differently. And when you put a lot of forethought into the way your lighting works, into the way your color works, and you kind of try to make it work organically with everything else you have in the game, you can do, once again, very beautiful games. And to give you a great example, Mirror's Edge, imagine if it was 100% realistic and super 3D. The problem is you would never be able to play, because you would have no idea where to go. Game design and the art style in that game reinforce one another, and they virtually can't exist without one another. And that is the case where, beauty just doesn't come as an afterthought, but it's an integral part of the process, where you're actually considering what are you trying to convey. If you're making just a portfolio piece, right, you're not thinking about gameplay. But if you are thinking about gameplay, and that there are certain things that you can do with your visuals to enhance the particular experience that you're shooting for. Like even Devil May Cry, right? They had an amazing, very juicy color palette in the screenshot that we've seen there, but their game actually kind of takes place in the two worlds. You have the demon world and the real world, and the reason that this color palette looks even more juicier is because their real world is extremely kind of drab and grayscale. They play up contrasts. They basically put a lot of forethought into making sure that every single bit of art that they make in the game works with the game, and not just like an isolated incident, basically. And then in order to be able to do that, right, the last point being you have to, and even as an individual artist, you can't always find ways to remove the minimally contributing work out of the way. And there are a lot of ways to do that, and a lot of them are available to an individual artist, but especially they're good for a studio, right? Because especially since the introduction of the Prevision of games, we've been modularizing. English is hard. A lot of things. If you look at like games made by Epic Games, right, like Gears of War and Real Tournament, they're built from the tiniest building blocks that they just put together into bigger pieces, and then bigger pieces, and they just work together in order to allow individual artists to accomplish a lot more than if they were just, modeling the entire world from scratch and dressing it and lighting it. You can just use your pre-created objects in order to put together a coherent composition and to, make it pretty. And you can do the same thing with textures. You can have trim textures that are tileable horizontally, and you can just unwrap your objects differently there and create a very sophisticated and realistic looking model just by using the one atlas that you have. And there are a lot of things that you can do along those lines, right? You can make your materials modular, where you can create just one pairing material in a lot of instances, and you just change individual textures, and you end up with a lot of variety as far as materials, considering, or not even considering, provided that you build the initial functionality into your initial shaders. And it goes the same way for programming and scripting. Outsourcing is not really readily available for students, right? But studios should do that. And it's an interesting thing to talk about, because there are still a lot of people that are somewhat adamant and somewhat feel that that might be actually sort of stealing their jobs in a way. And this is very crucial to understand that outsourcing is a great tool for liberating artists from the very mundane, boring, and non-contributing task at the end of the day. Because people that are buying your games are not buying them for that crate you model or for that barrel or that door. They don't really care. They buy it for the experience. They buy it for the vibe that they get from these environments. And that is made not with just individual texture, that is made with color compositions and lighting and the mood that you create at the end of the day. So if you as an artist are capable of doing that rather than individual objects, then you're way more valuable. And same thing goes for automating. If you can do scripting, great for you because you can get a lot of mundane, repetitive tasks out of the way, so it definitely helps. And this comes in handy a lot, especially when you have a small team, like most of the projects you see here do. But what also it allows you to accomplish is a very distinctive and visual style. When you can make a game with just a few people that is gonna rival the biggest AAA blockbusters as far as the critics and players are concerned. For example, when Journey came out, right, everybody was raving about how good it looks, even though when we try and break it down, sort of the production time and the amount of money and man hours that they invested is nowhere near compared to the likes of Call of Duty. And the reason for that being, like, if you would imagine the surface contained in that triangle that you see there is sort of the untangible amount of beauty that your game is going to have. At the bottom, you would always have art direction, which is basically the foundation of your game's visuals. And when you're talking about a game that is ultra realistic, right, something like Call of Duty, they still put a lot of effort into art direction, but at the end of the day, their final result is really dictated by the amount of polish and detail and realism that is put into every single asset that they have to produce, which requires a lot of man hours, a lot of money, a lot of time, and at the end of the day, just, turns out to be very expensive and inaccessible to a lot of smaller teams. But when you look at the games like Journey, right, I could probably model the entire thing in a month if I just had the blockouts or the concepts or anything. Because it's not about the execution there, but the ideas that they managed to arrive at took a lot of time. And so this is kind of the trade-off that you have to make at the end of the day, right? If you decide to spend the time and to think up a very interesting and very engrossing visual style, you can actually cut down the production time significantly and still have a similar or comparable result, if not better, right? Because everybody was really raving about Journey, but everybody was saying that Call of Duty's engine starts to show age and all of that. Like, there are differences in the way people perceive things, and when you can really push for those buttons, like purely artistic buttons, people respond to that. So, basically, at the end of the day, this is the last slide, but I'm not going to read it because it's pretty boring. I just wanted basically to tell you a personal story of mine about how this talk came to be. Being an artist, an environment artist, I constantly did and still do personal projects, working on my own art. And quite a few years ago, I did an environment for a personal piece that I, at first, was pretty content with. I saw that I did like a semi-decent job. I felt that it was high quality, and the fidelity was there and everything. But then I just happened to stumble upon a piece of art made by a different artist around the same time, and it felt like the amount of quality and polish that he put into his own piece was equal, or at least like comparable, right? But his image produced a way more dramatic effect on me. I remember seeing that and just saying, wow. And then the question I had to ask myself was, does anybody actually say wow when they look at my image? And that was a very worrying realization, because I was a professional for a couple of years by that time. And I realized that all these years that I've been teaching myself and doing games professionally, I was never actually in control of the beauty of my own art, just because I was so preoccupied with details and high quality that I didn't really, for a moment, stop to think, what is really beautiful? What people are going to resonate with? What am I actually trying to accomplish here? Because the usual loop that happens for aspiring artists is that you get inspired by someone else's work, and then you're just trying to replicate that, and put your own twist on it, and that's about it. And you never go deeper trying to analyze what actually made that work so beautiful that you want to recreate, and what parts of it you don't really want to recreate and leave behind, kind of replace with something of your own. And this is the bigger question, I think. And you learning right now And I mean, we're all learning and growing, but there is going to be a point for every one of us where you're going to be confident that you can produce anything in the confines of the current graphical generation. And then there's a way bigger question that I want you guys to kind of ask for yourself, and that to be your takeaway from this talk, where when you are capable of producing anything, how can you be sure that whatever you're going to do is going to be beautiful unless you specifically dedicate yourself to achieving that? Thank you.